So we've been this week for breakfast. I hadn't seen him. I haven't seen him before COVID. So it's been like 3 years. So it was nice to catch up with him.
Going for breakfast?
Yeah. When I try to get together with him once in a while, it's kind of hard to get hold of. And we realized I hadn't seen him since before.
Me?
How's everything going?
Good, yeah. It's funny because I was just thinking that I'm going to see him Friday.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Originally what they told me was that.
Yeah.
Girls, are you girls?
Also,
Just a bit.
good to see you.
Sure she was. Yeah.
So you have to go to Austin a lot?
But we're good. I think we're just about.
Yeah, Carlos was in it. So you just go testify of working out.
Wow.
Yeah,
Also, the RMA.
It was the same one. It was the working RMA bill was there. That was our first years for those.
That one's in there. Do you have to go back at all, or?
It's quite an intense place, isn't it? The sound of it. It's good though. It's very different thing.
Yeah, after that, I went the following week.
Yeah.
Daughter,
She's from Juarez, so she's quite
They
like
task force meetings.
and so I think she just she's no kind of
You know what she's gonna do?
wants to do things. I mean, had a good experience now.
It's gonna ramp up more and more over the next few.
Yeah, she did it. Heading to business.
She has a order
Online
right
from
now.
Amazon. She works for Amazon. So
That would,
So she had a good experience.
Here in El Paso.
Yeah.
The
Unless you gotta fly like a fit or.
it's American. I see, you know, but so yeah,
Oh, you've got a direct.
I've seen him twice this year. I went to
I mean, there's no direct connection.
He's doing well. He's older, like we all are. Anyway, he's working for the city store.
Right, can everybody hear me? Having a little bit of trouble getting the microphone low enough, so I'll move up a little
We're
bit.
doing a lot of stuff for the city.
There we go. Okay. A quick word of welcome to everybody. Thank you so much for joining us both in person and online for this community meeting for the Downtown Deck Plaza Foundation. My name is Martin Bartlett from Contour Engineers, Strategic Planning and Communications team. It's our pleasure to be with you this evening, along with our colleagues from Stantec who've been busily at work behind the scenes since last we met. Just a bit of a quick plug before we go any further. We're really excited to be with you all this evening here tonight, but we also want to remind you that we do have a series of upcoming public meetings where we're going to be taking some of what we're presenting tonight and some of what we gained at the last round of public meetings earlier this spring out to the public to really hear from the community about what they think about the guiding principles which have been established and also some of the preliminary concepts. So we'll be getting some information around to all of you later this afternoon or later this evening about the exact dates and times of those public meetings that are coming up, as I said, later this week, tomorrow night, Wednesday night, and Thursday night. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask if we can go around and introduce ourselves so everyone here in the room knows who's present with us tonight. And online as well, yes. Gina, we'll start with you.
Hello, everybody. I am Gina Martinez, and I am at El Paso Inc., representing myself. And I also founded Neon Desert Music Festival, so have experience in the event production space.
Good evening, everyone. Good to see you. Tracy Yellen with the Paso del Norte Community Foundation, which includes the Downtown Deck Plaza Foundation.
Garrett Yancey, Assistant General Counsel at Job Materials.
Hi, I'm Eduardo Calvo with the El Paso Metropolitan Planning Organization.
Good evening, I'm Warren Goodell, Executive Director at Kelly Center for Hunger Relief.
Chris Schroeder, Capital Improvement Department, City of El Paso.
Manny Moreno, I'm here representing my District 3 Representative, Cassandra Hernandez.
I'm Simon Chandra. I'm here representing Southside Neighborhood Association and El Paso Neighborhood Coalition.
I'm Joaquin Rodriguez, the Transportation Planning Administrator for the city.
Good evening, I'm Kyle Ibarra with the City of El Paso.
Daniela Quesada, Chief Architect for the City of El Paso.
Apolonia Roldan, Urban Design Manager with the City of El Paso. Marcela Tolini, Urban Design Manager with the City of El Paso. Bethany Rivera Molinat, I'm the Executive Director of Ciudad Nueva Community Outreach, and our community will be directly affected by this.
Brandon Carrillo with the Rio Grande Neighborhood Association.
Right near I-10, north of the freeway.
Veronica Carrillo, also from the Rio Grande Neighborhood Association.
Pamela Soto, PIO with Home.
So we have a really robust crowd with us in person. So now I'm going to go to the folks who are joining us virtually. I will call on you each by name if you could tell us a little bit about who you are and who you're representing this evening. I'm going to begin with Laura Uribarri.
Hi, good afternoon. Laura Uribarri, Associate Professor with UT Health Houston School of Public Health, El Paso campus.
I'm waiting for the screen to clear. Next up, I believe I see Cinco Houghton.
I am Cinco Houghton with Cadence Lending Group. I have an office right near where the proposed deck will be.
Peter Schwartzbein.
Hey, Martin, it's Peter Schwartzbein, former Mayor Pro Tem and City Councilman for District 1 in El Paso, Texas, and also have a gallery in the studio space in downtown El Paso for almost 10 years now.
Thank you so much. Caroline North.
I'm Caroline North. I'm on the Paso Del Norte Community Foundation Board and a community volunteer.
Is there anyone I've missed who I haven't called on?
I'm Suzanne Dipp. I'm with Sunrise Civic Group. I'm a downtown business owner and an employer, also property manager.
Hi, I'm Layla Zaiden. I'm the co-founder of Moms on Board, a social networking group that represents families in El Paso.
Hello all, this is Harrison Plord, Assistant Director with El Paso MPO.
I'll leave the floor open for just a couple more seconds. Anyone else online?
Hi, this is Stephanie Blackwoody-Body. I'm with Pearl Properties.
Anyone else? Very good. The extreme opportunity to hand it over to our colleagues from Stantec Who, and as I said, busily working in the background. I think you'll be really excited to hear some of what they have to say. I'm going to hand it over to Pierre Chaco first, who I believe introduced his colleagues as well.
Thank you, Martin. Can everybody hear me? And good evening and welcome again to the third Community Advisory Committee since we started this project on the Paso Plaza activities. But besides myself, my name is Pierre Chaco and I'm a principal at Stantec and the open design leader. Also with me, I have two of my esteemed colleagues. They will tell that as they start the presentation. But we do have Maggie Connor as well as I also want to mention that one of our team members from HRNA, who are our economic analysis consultants, is also online, Mara Bethage. And she'll also introduce herself when she gets going on her presentation. So I wanted to thank you all for being here and to continue to give us input. The input that you're giving us, I want to assure you, is really influencing the process, and hopefully you'll see that in the work that we're going to be presenting today. Let me briefly go over the agenda with you. We're going to spend our time in three parts today. We're going to briefly recap the process so you can kind of see where we come from and where we're going, get an overview of the process. We're going to briefly go over a summary of the work to date. We've seen a fair amount of this information before, so we're going to go through it quite quickly, except for one piece. You're going to get a overview of the market assessment of the context that we're working in from HRNA. Mara is going to talk about that, and we're going to spend more time on that. And then after we're done with that, we're going to pause for a brief while so that you can have some questions on the content. We're then going to move to the next part of the presentation, which is talking about the current progress since the last meeting, some of the new things that we've done. We're really going to be focusing then on the concepts that we've been developing, some preliminary evaluation of those concepts, and then also some presentation of programming ideas that we've heard from you and we've tried to reflect our concepts as well. And then we're going to conclude on some more discussion where we'd like to hear back from you one more time. So there's going to be 2 breaks when we're going to try to hear from you and get some more feedback. So with that, a very quick overview of the process. As you can see on this slide, we started back in February, March, really trying to listen and learn from everybody here. We had meetings with you, we had public open houses. We also had interviews with a wide range of stakeholders. And that information helped inform our visioning and our goals for this project. Through March and April, we began to develop conceptual alternatives and options. You may remember from our last meeting, you saw fresh ideas that we developed actually just in the last 2 days. They were very fresh and you saw them as kind of works in progress. Today, we're going to present them a little bit more developed. You're going to see how our framework of evaluation has been informed by the goals that you helped us develop. And you're also going to be seeing some initial concepts on programming. And based on the input we hear from you today, we're then going to move on to really the final step in this process, but we're going to try to hone in on a preferred concept that can hopefully be carried forward into the next phase of this project, which is going to focus on thematic design and engineering to really inform implementation. So we're beginning to approach that important milestone at the end of what is phase 1 of this process, which will be with the selection of a preferred option. So without further ado, let me invite David Dixon to get this process kicked off.
Okay, hello everybody, and I've met, I think, probably all of you virtually, but I'm a real person and it's great to see the real you. I want to reiterate, I think what Pierre said, that this is, or certainly implied, an extraordinary opportunity. And what I want to emphasize is, Pierre's just sort of walking through the process. One of the things we are very conscious of, there are a number of cities creating decks, deck plazas, deck parks, deck whatever. And there's a lot to learn from them, but this has got to be El Paso's next great place. If we're all going to have done the job we need to do, it needs to grow out of who El Paso is, what El Paso is, and be really rooted in what we've learned from you and about El Paso. So the foundational input that Pierre alluded to is extremely important, whether it's hearing from folks in communities, from our neighborhoods, from the city, from the sort of grassroots vendors who are out there sort of selling and practicing the living culture of El Paso, to a wide spectrum of folks. From that, we've been able to develop a mission and vision, understand what the building blocks for the deck should be, how to look at options and choose one. And if at any point you see how to make this, how we can do a better job of making this El Paso's next great place, please tell us. I want to start with some of the key takeaways that my colleagues and I've had the honor and the pleasure of working with certainly some of you to lead the downtown plus uptown plan. And there are a couple of really strong messages. One is, and the foundation's done a great job of pointing this out, to not just strengthen, but reinvigorate, recreate the strong and even more vital connections between neighborhood and downtown and neighborhood. So this is a place you just walk to and you love the walk and you love the destination. It's to enhance downtown itself, to play the kind of leadership role as the heart of a multicultural community, but also an even stronger economic engine to help create opportunity and equity across the board for all El Pasoans. And this requires enhancing a deck that helps enhance downtown as a place to live, work, play, learn, interact, and innovate. And maybe most important and key to all of these, creating a really robust multicultural destination for the city and region. This isn't just about the neighborhoods in downtown. This is about everybody in the city and region. And why don't you take over?
So the second important foundational input that we had was the content we got from you all. And this, again, as I mentioned, came from the public open houses, from the previous CAC meetings, as well as from stakeholder interviews that we had. And there was a quite a wealth of information that we gathered. But here we've tried to sort of summarize some of the highlights, the common themes that we heard, the idea of reconnecting neighborhoods, and to really create a Deck Plaza that's a place for everyone and all El Pasoans was a common theme. We also heard the idea of celebrating El Paso's people, the unique border city culture as an important thing that should inform this process. We also heard about design for El Paso's climate, shade, native trees, plants, as well as green space. And then lastly, we also heard an emphasis on dining for families and children. Now this, as I said, is just a set of highlights, but I want to remind you, you've seen this content before. Based on some of the stakeholder input, we got a wealth of insight into what the community values about El Paso, as well as some of the issues and challenges that we should be prepared to deal with. And the bold text here are the ones that were really resonating with a lot of people we heard from. We also heard about specific thoughts about the plaza itself, both themes in terms of kinds of things that you'd want to see, native plants, shade, vendor spaces, food trucks, performance spaces, etc., but also some of the concerns that you were anticipating that you wanted us to pay particular attention. So with that, the next important foundational input was market context. We're going to spend a little bit more time on this because it's new content. And for this, I'm going to turn over to Mara, if you would first start by introducing yourself. And then Mara, if you could just prompt me to change slides when you're ready.
That's great. Hi, everyone. Hoping that you can hear me okay. My name is Mara Bassage-Pease, and I'm a senior analyst with HRNA. Our firm has been working with Stantec on a lot of the market context. Be coming together to continue supporting, particularly funding and financing, including operating structure as we continue to engage with this team. So today I'll walk through some of our information that we found about demographics, about the site itself, and then also about starting to look at development opportunities around the Deck Park and what kind of activation we can see there. This is just some of the precedent work that we've been a part of. You can see Seattle, Dallas, Atlanta, all with very different project implications, very different sites, and trying to look at kind of what goes around the site, and especially for our firm, how can we sustainably operate it? Looking beyond construction, we really care about making sure that the aspirations actually meet what we designed in the beginning. And so we're excited about the commitment of the Stantec team to that as well. Throughout this presentation, I'll talk through a few different sites. My echo.
Keep going.
So there's a few different sites that we looked at to contextualize the deck, and the Deck Park, of course, we know is kind of in that dense area of the I-10 in the middle of our study area. For the study area, we selected sites within a quarter mile of the area on census tract, which is too detailed for you all, but helps to define this kind of wide area. Downtown is a collection that EPS looks at for the study as well. So some of the work that we were doing was perfect, thanks. Was building off of previous studies that we know have already been done in this area and making sure that we're not duplicating efforts. So you'll see the study area, downtown, and how we compared it to the city. I also wanted to note that in the uptown downtown plan, there was a downtown market identified by Stantec, and that really closely aligns with our study area. So just for consistency, we'll say study area throughout this presentation. We can keep going. So to start with, I'll talk through a few of the most interesting demographics findings that we have been looking at as a team and reading into kind of what that might mean for demand, for trends, for who are our existing residents, how are we taking care of them with this, and what does it mean for growth implications. So the first thing that we found really interesting is that the study area itself is younger than the rest of the city. We see the spike in workers aged 25 to 44 right now, just as a static point in time. But we also see that as a trend over the last 5 or so years. You can see that this workforce age population is growing most quickly, implying, there's a demand in folks that want to live in these denser urban amenitized areas, and there would be a continuing interest as we continue to grow there. Whereas the rest of El Paso is where we see a lot of our city residents, a lot of our families, and residents under 18. The second piece of information that we really wanted to note here is that the study area and the downtown have a significantly lower median income than the rest of the city. The study area itself is just $20,000 annual income, whereas the city of El Paso is $54,000 on an annual basis. And what this means is we need to think about different access points as we expand on the design of the deck, making sure that folks of all income are able to access the amenities, feel welcomed, and also that we're able to balance that income with more economic opportunities as well. We also note, hopefully this isn't a surprise, but the renter population in the study area is exceptionally high at 91%, whereas in the rest of the city, it's a lot of homeowners. This tends to change what people might care about when they're looking at the deck, and how kind of we're thinking about renter populations and people that have turnover, but also balancing that with the residents that we know are going to be homeowners just adjacent to the park, thinking about anti-displacement strategies in advance to make sure that this asset is really able to help people and not to hurt them in the long run. In terms of jobs, we also wanted to look at what types of jobs are already downtown. And we noted that there's 15,000 jobs in the downtown area. And you can see it's been pretty consistent down there on that yellow line, growing a little bit year over year. Whereas in the city of El Paso, there's been a little bit more fluctuation. So it's a pretty steady job market in the downtown and city area. This chart's a little bit too much info, but on the right, you can see, hopefully the text isn't too tiny, the top industries downtown and particularly their growth. So if we're looking, left to right, you can see that administration and support is the top one and has that highest value over time with some peaks and some falls. Healthcare and social assistance has actually been growing the most in recent times. And then underneath that, you also see professional, scientific, and technical services, accommodation and food services, finance and insurance, and retail trade, which are all really typical industries to dominate a downtown market, and just helps us think about what kind of job opportunities there might be if offices are able to relocate into the downtown area, what types of investments we could be seeing from an economic development standpoint. We secondly conducted a market analysis, which means that we looked at the existing market conditions, but also some of the demand projections through 2040. And again, these are a little bit more narrow, just looking at that core study area, but we looked at it for multifamily, for office, for retail, and for hotel. So I'll just go through one example of each of the types of data that we were looking at. In terms of the multifamily market analysis, it's important to note that right now the study area only has 2% of the multifamily housing stock, which is pretty small considering the entire city of El Paso. But what you can also see in the bar chart with the blue line on it is that vacancy rates are pretty low. So as soon as a building is constructed, it fills up, and we see that the demand certainly is there. That being said, you can see that the rent per square foot is slightly lower, and we know a lot of this is because the newer developments downtown have mostly been affordable. So thinking about that in the context of the market. The demand projections for the study area is 10,000 mixed income units, and that's a really ambitious, aggressive number. We'll talk about it later, but the aspirational 15% capture rate takes a lot of market investment, and it's important to note that the distribution between market rate and affordable is about 2/3, 1/3. So having within that 10K number is about 3.3 K of affordable units. We think that residential is going to really drive a lot of the investment and placemaking of the study area and adjacent to the deck park. But we also wanted to look at some of the other land uses as well. Office in the study area has not necessarily had a lot of recent construction. You can see there's even some net absorption that's in the negative as businesses have maybe moved into the West Star Tower or have gone remote following COVID. And vacancy rates kind of peaked during COVID and are coming back down, but are still a little bit high. Within the study area, we're projecting just about 400,000 square feet of office space, which hosts a good number of workers, but speculative office is not necessarily the strongest retail use that we're seeing in the area. Retail in the study area, as many retail did across the country and around the world, certainly struggled during the pandemic with, again, kind of net absorption in the negatives, higher vacancy rates, but it's settling back down. We also know that a lot of study has been done by Men Collaborative and others on this team about what are the actual retail needs. That's not something that we covered in ours. We just kind of looked at a higher level about land use and square footage, and we know that there's at least 162 square feet, 1,000 square feet of retail that can be captured in the study area. And lastly, hotel. We know there's a lot of hotels that have recently been constructed downtown, especially kind of adjacent to the convention center using those tax incentives. And the previous analysis projected up to 250 hotel rooms in the study area, which is pretty modest. And we already know that there's 290 hotel rooms in the pipeline. So we didn't really focus on that as part of our analysis. So the last slide on the market analysis that I wanted to show here is that summary of comparing what is our projected capture rate, how much of the city's growth do we think the downtown and study area can capture, versus how much of it do we currently have and what trends have we seen in capture rates. So residential, currently the study area capture is at 3% and growth captured since 2010 is at 2%. So an aspirational 15% capture rate requires really significant investment, and it's based on other cities that are making similar investments. It's a demographically adjusted projection rate, which means that aside from historic market trends, if we're seeing increasing amounts of young folks moving into the downtown area, how can we kind of truly assess that and reach the potential that we know the study area could have with an investment like the Deck Plaza? Office and retail, we can see that the growth captured since 2010 hasn't been in the study area primarily. We've seen a lot of development that's kind of on the corridors of El Paso, but the current capture of the study area has remained pretty consistent. So still interested in, once you bring in more residents, once you bring in more employees, using retail as kind of an activation strategy as you continue to bring in workers and residents. The last part of our study that we wanted to share here is about where does that development demand go? And so we've identified these 9 sites adjacent to the Deck Plaza. And again, this is just kind of in the really adjacent vicinity, and all of which are unused or underutilized. You can see most of them have no development on them or a small building footprint, and in totaling about 5.2 acres. If we go to the next slide, we can see how we started to think about what development would look like in these sites. And so it's most of what we've seen kind of precedented in the El Paso market is this medium density stick frame over podium, which means it goes to about 5 feet. It'll look more like the art space lofts than anything towering or steel. And the reason for this is that using wood for construction significantly lowers costs than using steel. And so it'll be more plausible to get those units in these spaces more quickly using that level of density. So when we look at it all together, we're projecting that just at those sites immediately adjacent to the Deck Plaza, about 10% of the multifamily demand for the entire study area could be located on those sites. And that, again, is mixed income units. So we're going for the 2/3, 1/3 market rate to affordable within those units. We see some demand for office space. Maybe one of the buildings or one of the sites would be an entire office building. And then retail, we added some ground floor retail into our assumptions for a few of the office or multifamily spaces. So again, kind of that artist loft model of ground floor amenities with residents up above. I think we have one more slide where we talk about what's next. Perfect. So where are we going with this? A lot of what we're thinking about within development is how we can use investments like the Deck Plaza to create value for the entire study area, the entire downtown, even the entire city, and use those developments, whether it's by pace or by increased value, to actually put money back into operating not only the Deck Park, but all of the different money that we already know is in the Tours for Downtown, can contribute to ongoing initiatives like the Museum District, and kind of continue to enliven both the downtown, but then also the areas that are surrounding it throughout El Paso. So the one we have here, I think many of the folks in this room, I'm sure, are familiar with Tours, but just wanted to put up one of the examples of types of strategies that we'll be looking at in our next phase of research. I think there's many other values that we know we can get from land value capture, value from public assets, regulatory and zoning considerations like density bonuses and affordable housing. And we'll be looking to all of those to understand really what value is this creating and what can we do with that value. Thank you all.
Thanks, Mara. So this is a good time for us to pause. I know there was a lot of information. Some of it is quite technical, but if you have questions or thoughts or some feedback, this is a good time for us to take a brief break on that. Anybody want to start?
Yeah. So about the data, since this is a health foundations kind of project, did you look at any data on health in the census tracts near the study area or air pollution?
Not as a part of this particular scope. Mara, do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Well, I wanted to say that I know we've looked at urban heat island in the area. We personally didn't look at health data. I know that there's some data available on like asthma rates and that kind of thing. So that's an interesting point about the area, but one that we didn't consider.
Yeah, the CDC places data set has asthma 36. You check that, that'd be great.
Yes. Thank you. Good point, and it's something that we will take a look at. It wasn't in the scope of the study.
That's confusing because.
But it's a good point.
And EPA has air pollution data, so.
Sorry, did you say that air pollution and health are not part of the scope of this project?
No, I was saying that it just wasn't part of the market study. The market analysis that Mara just walked through was really just focused on the market and the economic side of it. But those 2 points that you mentioned, the health, as well as essentially the health related data, that'd be part of what we'll take a look at in the overall.
So our focus really was on kind of those real estate opportunities and economic development. But as we holistically consider the investment in the park, I think exactly what Pierre is saying, that CDC and health data is important.
And as a quick postscript, the factor that will most correlate with improved, particularly diabetes, less maybe asthma, but public health generally, is getting people walking more, creating a mixed-use walkable environment.
So it's already the most walkable part of the city, the lowest households with the lowest number of car ownership, like 0. And we have the worst health outcomes because of air pollution.
Air pollution's been linked to diabetes by the American Lung Society, so I think association. So I think that's a really important thing to look into.
Yes, absolutely. And in the broader scope of evaluation criteria, that would be absolutely one of the evaluations we would have. And despite the fact that this, you talked about the potential is there, the actual, with the investment and the type of activities that we're talking about on the deck, there's a great deal of opportunity through connections to the surroundings to actually promote the transportation.
But if air pollution is increased by traffic and it doesn't matter, like I developed asthma in my neighborhood running 4 miles a day. Never had it my whole life until here. And I was running 4 miles a day. And so I think that's something like we can have this great place to work out, but if the pollution is increased in this area because of traffic, because of this expansion, because of traffic being brought to this place as a venue, then
You can also have great economic development plans, but it's not going to be worth much if you have a sick workforce.
So I think it's important to make a little bit of a distinction between the two components of this project. One is the Nextart freeway expansion, and the other is the deck Plaza proposal on top of it. The two are connected to each other, but they are two separate projects.
How are they connected?
Well, they're connected in that the freeway footprint is what's going to provide the opportunity to provide the deck over it.
So the
In
deck
order to
part-
reconnect the sides. And if you imagine, as you see shortly in some of the diagrams that we'll talk about, it can completely change the nature of that experience. And what would otherwise be an open gash in the ground versus a covered deck, that would be a very different experience for pedestrians, etc., that are experiencing that space. Now, to the point though, just quickly, it doesn't solve the larger impacts of I-10. That's not something that this project can hope to undo. But what it can do is make that area where the deck is being considered, it could make it better from those health outcome standpoints.
And last question, because the Deck Park Foundation website says it'll be cheaper if we expand the freeway because TxDOT will add reinforcement. But if we don't expand the freeway, it'll cost more money. So it seems like a conflict of interest to have a health foundation not opposed to freeway expansion because they're going to get free money. So that I don't think that's bad.
The points that you're making regarding the importance of looking at the health data in terms of some of the benefits that can accrue from how this project is handled, I think that's a point well taken. Now, it's something that we should probably get back to later on. Any other questions?
I was going to ask you, can you go back to the map to show the study area? I apologize, I was trying to get on the WebEx to see the map. Because I think it's important to understand the study area, downtown, and of course, the city context. So you're looking at the study areas of the gray area, right?
The blue area?
Isn't blue.
This is where the deck is, or the I-10 corridor. And then the area that's in light orange, if you will, is the larger downtown, uptown study area that provides the larger context for the study area, which is more focused. So the study area is actually looking at the more of the immediate vicinity of the Correct. And so this is what Mara was referring to when she talked about the study area. This is how the data was collected to match that area.
I think someone raised their hand online.
Yes. You go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, this is Peter Schwartzbein. Can you go back to the map that shows the sort of plots of land in like the navy blue?
Is this one?
Yeah.
See it?
Yeah. So I just wanted to comment that one thing that I think would be important for this study is in terms of next steps, what could be offered, because you talk about TERSs, but what other sort of policy related initiatives could encourage responsible density, mixed use, affordable housing in this? I know that the Housing Authority has, I think, probably a block or two away from this in Western Sonora, affordable housing project that's broken ground and is currently being constructed, or dirt is moving, as well as the Blue Flame building, which is about 5 blocks away probably from this area. I think that that's an important part of this, as well as to help advise policymakers about what could be looked at further in terms of encouraging the kind of responsible density and development around this area. I also think, to the point about the fact that this is already an area that has one of the lowest percentages of car ownership, as well as helping to bring back neighborhoods that were separated from the introduction of I-10 in the late 60s, as an important component of this project as well. Not to mention the need to make something that's family oriented and celebrates the culture and people in this very unique part of the world. Thank you.
We looked at, yeah, I'm sorry, we looked at, thanks, a great question. We looked at a number of these sites and other sites in downtown and nearby uptown neighborhoods in terms of what it would take to unlock the feasibility of the redevelopment that you were seeing. And primarily, it did come down to the need for initial subsidies to construct the redevelopment feasible. These subsidies pay rich dividends going forward. Frankly, the easiest thing to develop, as probably everyone here knows at this point, is affordable housing, because that does come with readily available subsidies. The harder part is to bring the market component, but we really want to make sure that this emerges as a mixed income, economically diverse scene between neighborhood and city. One of the things we looked at was, I think, probably roughly 10 other communities in Texas that have developed a series of innovative tools and financial incentives and have been very successfully realizing significant new downtown and downtown adjacent development. And I think rather than take a lot of time at this meeting, we can email that to everybody who's here, because it's very important. This is going to be a partnership, city, foundation, and many others to fully achieve. And it's very important to understand how everything we talk about can be made real. Is that fair?
Yeah, and I just want to comment, for example, the art space lofts that you reference in this, from the aesthetic perspective, in terms of how it was designed, those utilized affordable housing tax credits, and it's actually affordable housing and a mixed-use project as well. And the discussions with Blue Flame and Nuestra Senora with the Housing Authority did at one point discuss a market rate portion of that. It didn't pencil out, and it ultimately didn't work. So I think that there's already sort of models and ideas around there that I think can both have a market and an affordable housing component. And I think it's important to look at that as well.
We'll send you out the specifics that literally identify the extent of the gaps for development like this and how to fill them.
Thanks for that input and for the questions. We should keep going. And if you have additional questions, make a note of them and we can follow up on them afterwards. So with that, I think it's time to introduce Maggie, right?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Good evening. I see a lot of familiar faces from when I was here for the last CAC meeting. So hello, good to see you again. I'm going to quickly go through the visioning section of this. This will be a lot of a repeat. It's a bit of a recap of where we were. But the things that go into this part of our discussion include the mission, which is reinforcing this idea that this is an unprecedented opportunity to really celebrate the rich heritage here, and to create a shared sense of community in the creation of this deck plaza. And the other thing that we talked about the last two CAC meetings, is also how this vision needs to work, not just regionally, not just from a neighborhood perspective, but hyper-local, right down to the site. And we talked at the last CAC meeting about how the deck plaza, for it to be successful and for this to really be transformative, it has to work as well at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday as it does on a Saturday where it's being programmed for big events. So really understanding that this is going to have a lot of different faces and it's going to have to live in a lot of different ways. At the workshop, we looked at a lot of things that I hope will resonate with you all, and got some good feedback. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time just so we can get through the content, but just to refresh your memories of where we were. The first is we started to talk about context. I'm going to use the little pointer here. To talk a bit about context and how the deck could relate not only to the immediately adjacent neighborhoods in terms of reconnecting them to downtown, but also understanding how there is this kind of institutional core through here and the idea of some new housing to be developed around it, and how that could begin to impact the deck itself and the uses on the deck. We talked a bit about connections, specifically looking at mobility and trying to understand how to better connect not just to the deck, on foot, on bike, through transit, and from the broader area, but also how to connect across it. So we talked about finding ways to prioritize bike linkages on key roads. We talked about transit priority and really beginning to aggregate and celebrate transit. Specifically, we looked at along Oregon, we looked at biking along El Paso and Stanton. And the idea is that maybe we could begin to build something like a transit center, a kind of hub here that could really help connect people too. So this is kind of to the point of getting some of those cars off the road, providing other options here, which is a real transformation of this going from being a highway to a place where people can use their other modes of transportation. We started to look specifically at pedestrian access and different ways to design intersections and to design the bridges across the deck to make them more pedestrian friendly. We looked at shared use spaces. We looked at connections that could really begin to straddle and form uniform spaces for programming in different ways that we could connect the north to the south. We also started to talk about early programming concepts, and we're going to get into that much deeper tonight, hopefully with a very robust discussion. But we looked at different ways to activate the deck spaces. And then we started to study different alternatives for how the deck could lay out, where the deck would exist, where existing buildings exist, how they could interact. And so we looked at a variety of different sort of frameworks, is what we're calling them. The first one is really looking at keeping surface condition that you see today very much the same, regardless of what TxDOT does with the underground surface. This is an idea where we are keeping all this north-south street connections, where Yandle and Wyoming become designed in such a way that they are pedestrian friendly, where existing buildings along Yandle are retained and can exist in the new plan. We also looked at over time, if those individual property owners so chose to redevelop their sites, how they could engage with the park in a different, or with the plaza rather, in a different way, and how they could be part of, this housing discussion and this activated ground floor discussion. We looked at options where if TxDOT were to take those properties, what would that implication be? What would that look like from a deck plaza configuration, and how much space would that be, and what would we have to do to make that successful? And then we looked at also different ways to think about facing adjacent buildings surrounding the deck plaza. And then we got some good feedback. I think we had a good conversation last time with the folks that attended, and here were some of the things that we took out of the conversation. The first was, again, a resounding that this needs to be a place for all El Pasoans. And so the first thing was that it must be welcoming. That's a theme that's come up a lot. I think somebody had said, welcome, Matt, in the first CAC meeting. But the idea, what we heard that meant was multi-generational, that there was no displacement of existing residents and businesses, that people of all incomes could be there, that people of all abilities could be there. We were asked to consider the experience from the highway. We were asked to consider the experience from the roads above. We even had somebody, sir, talked about the furry friends and having places for pets. We heard a lot about the safety of public spaces, that this must be safe, and that was not just to the physical structure of the deck, but also for the safety of the highway underneath, but pedestrian safety. We heard about safety for events, how that could be managed, so that this feels welcoming, warm, and inviting. And then finally, we talked about programmatic elements, again, that should reflect El Paso while serving the neighborhoods. And the idea that it was conscientious, so understanding that we're serving adjacent residents of Rio Grande and Sunset Heights and downtown, all neighborhoods within walking distance, that the elements should celebrate what is unique about El Paso, and that we are also told, of course, parking is a concern. We can talk more about that later. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to David to talk a bit about how we evaluate this.
Thank you. And this is not meant to be a lecture. So if you have a question, I know we've designated time for Q&A. Please just raise your hand and ask. We don't want you to be frustrated for 15 minutes. So We've talked about foundation in one sense, the foundation that you've given us, your goals and aspirations for the deck, what we've learned from a market analysis, et cetera. There's another way to use the word foundation, and that is what kind of deck do we need to be able to build in terms of how I-10 is configured underneath it and the kind of structural support it has. And there are a series that we'll call them sort of form enabling elements, thresholds that we really need to achieve to be able to unlock the kinds of opportunities that Maggie has just talked about. And clearly we have a series of parcels. The first is, and this is sort of the gold standard of air rights, deck plaza, public realm, buildings that are not just across the street from the deck, but actually open their doors and spill out right onto the deck, whether it's restaurants with cafes, et cetera, or cultural programs where the organization's upstairs and downstairs, it welcomes people and spills out activities, et cetera. So either we need natural land we can build on, or we need, frankly, the deck to provide enough support so we can build buildings that, again, directly open their doors onto the deck. Does this all make sense? Thank you, Luca. We need pedestrian-friendly frontage streets. That means streets that aren't just crossable, but invite being crossed. Do not think of 3-lane little mini highways on either side, but nice urban streets that invite crossing. I also want to remind some of our colleagues here how important connections are. This talks about extending, making sure there are street trees, shade. We fill in the development holes for several blocks on either side of the deck to encourage walkability to the deck. But you reminded me that one of the things we learned in the Uptown Downtown Plan is that a large majority of the new housing in the neighborhoods near downtown and in downtown can be built within a 5-minute walk of bus, rapid transit, or streetcar. And that we can actually increase the frequency of service and convenience of both of those by increasing the number of households that they can serve. As Maggie said, we need to have streets to either side of the deck that really invite retrofitting of buildings that currently back toward the deck to turn around and open to the deck. And to create new development opportunities, not just right on the deck, but a block back from the deck that really honor its importance to the city. This is the city's next great place. It should be surrounded by some of the buildings, next great generation, city's next generation of buildings. We need enough support everywhere on the deck so we can have soil to create high desert arboretum, play fountains for children, places that food trucks can drive onto for special occasions, where we can have lightweight one-story marketplaces, where large numbers of people can gather for a concert. In other words, it can't just be a deck that you can walk across. It has to be a deck that you can play on, enjoy, interact on. And not only that, when you all meet 20 years from now, I hope you can meet with us, but with somebody, you're going to have different ideas about what should go on the deck. So we need a deck that's adaptable going forward to changing uses as our society changes. So when we look at the alternatives, options that Maggie talked about quickly, 1A, 1B, 2A, 2C, it's pretty clear that 1A, that the ability particularly to be able to line the deck with either current or new buildings that open onto it makes a determinate difference in terms of the sort of threshold foundation that we need to be created as the I-10 is as planned and configured. Is this all making sense to folks? Okay, thanks. All right, so now let's talk about, we have a foundation, what are we going to put on it? And we're going to start, because we're very linear here, with principles. We call them urban design building blocks that talk about the really goals that we need to achieve if we're going to honestly say with all of you and you to your larger community that we achieve what we started out to. And the first is place that can be a real cultural crossroads, A cultural crossroads is not something with pictures of historic El Paso on public art. It can have that, but we're the living culture, the folks who make food, music, art, have figured out how to design the coolest clothes that are about their tradition, can all come and do business. So that means we need buildings opening onto the deck. We need a deck that can support temporary structures, et cetera, where that can house these folks on a weekend when they come to do business here. We need places where we can have concerts, et cetera. In other words, we have to make the goals real, and that's what these urban design building blocks are about. When we talk about enhanced connectivity and accessibility, and got to be careful I don't repeat myself, but that means trees, shade trees that extend several blocks in either direction to invite people to not just walk across the deck, but to the deck in the first place so they don't drive. We also need a deck that will support maybe a marketplace at Oregon and Mesa, which are two very important streets, and pop-up structures elsewhere so that you don't just walk past a deck, several hundred feet of deck with nothing happening, but you can grab lunch, hear music, buy things, see friends, et cetera, along the way. We need something that fits with downtown context. That means it's programmed in ways that relate to the Children's Museum, the Art Museum, the things that are happening around it. You'll hear a garden proposal that relates to Sunset Heights, for example, that it reflect what's happening around it and enrich the things that are happening around it. It needs to be a place of inclusive economic development. And we addressed this a number of times. And there are two particular ways this can happen. One, lots of places where entrepreneurs who have had a dream all their lives can come and open a business because they get some financial help. There's a pop-up structure that didn't cost very much to build, so they don't have to invest to be here. And they can come and try starting out a business. We could have pop-up restaurants that, what's the term? A ghost kitchen where various folks can use the same kitchen without the necessary investment. Ways to really empower people in starting businesses and bringing their entrepreneurship to a place where lots of people will see them. But also we need to make sure that there are a range of jobs and that we have places and organizations that train people for these jobs so these jobs are accessible. Again, this is all about making the dream real, and what more important than real, implementation feasibility. And you will note that this slide will look a lot like the slide before it because it is the same structures, the same opportunity to bring commerce to the deck that promotes inclusive economic opportunity that also will allow us to generate increased value over time to pay for all of this. And of course, we need cutting edge sustainability, and we can do that with any of the options, but whether it's recirculating water or electric generation, solar panels on top of a shade structure, this needs to be state of the art and a symbol of El Paso's sense of environmental responsibility. And so to give you a sense of bringing this to life, we just did a couple of quick sketches. And maybe more important is, I hope you'll like the sketch. This is just one quick sense of what it would be like to walk down Oregon and cross the deck. More important are all the things embedded in here, whether it's childcare or a music cafe or a place for cultural organizations or food trucks to show up where they'll really have not only will they enrich the place, but the place will give them a chance to operate a business. A transit center to encourage all those folks who live within a 5-minute walk of transit to use it. Children's play activities that are also public art. You'll all get a copy of this and you can read it. But I hope this gives you a sort of a sense of the goals underpinning what we're going to continue to talk about going forward. Does this all sound like what you thought you were here to do? Just say no if you mean no, but I hope you'll say yes. Okay, so I want to invite Maggie to talk about how we begin to translate these into tangible activities. Thank you.
And we do that with a slide with a lot of words. What's more fun than reading? All of this is to say that where this programming has started has been through a lot of the community feedback, and then through the benchmarking and the foundational work and all that stuff, is to understand what are some program elements that could work here and what is the mix of it? And so one of the things that we really want to get your feedback on today are the kinds of things that can go into this deck plaza. What are those things that make this feel truly like El Paso? Like what are those things that, you know, sort of celebrate what it means to be from here and about here? And then the thing that I think is really interesting, at least about this conversation, is that we're also starting to think about them, like what are the things that are your everyday activities? What's your core programming? And then what's happening weekly? What's happening monthly? What's a special event? Because the idea is that for this it's not just the physical planning that goes into this, but it's that ongoing programming, management, and maintenance of the deck plaza and the uses there that really enliven it. So when we talk about things like safety and we talk about inclusivity, you know, that is really keyed, I think, to the programming of this space. The other thing is that we're also thinking at the same time about the sustainability opportunities here, which has everything to do, of course, certainly with it being a sustainable site, access to public transportation, multimodal, the idea of capturing what stormwater you have, potentially capturing what wind energy there is. There's quite a lot of wind energy. You know, this idea that the deck itself can be part of reducing noise pollution. You know, you talked about air quality. We are only affecting a small stretch of the road, but that we've talked already with the engineers about ventilation and in the ways that that gets scrubbed and cleaned before being released into the air. And the idea that you can engage that into the deck structure in a way that is sustainable and that is creating its own energy. So those are the things we're looking at: green materials, we're looking at water efficiency. The other thing that we've talked a lot about is understanding the climate.
One urgent question.
Yes, sure.
Further, so that's good to hear about working with engineers who are looking into scrubbing the air. The thing is I mentioned earlier, I'm from the Rio Grande Neighborhood Association. So that tech stop project is 6 miles long from Copia to Executive. This deck plaza is 6 blocks long, and it's not going to pass through my neighborhood. So if this deck plaza is going to be built with the help, like depending on TxDOT's help to construct or reconstruct those pillars, right? And they're only going to do that if they proceed with their project, which includes adding lanes to that 6 mile stretch. That feature is not really going to help my neighborhood all that much.
TxDOT will be subsidizing, right? We can still pay for the supports without the expansion. Just want to be clear.
Yeah, so if there's a way, so just real quick, how much of this project is funded, and is there a way to find funding to cover the cost of those pillars so that you aren't depending on TxDOT to cover the cost of those pillars?
So that's not a question we have an answer on today, but it is part of our scope to, by the end of phase 1, to understand the relationship between costs and economic potential, and to then begin cities already looking at exploring funding sources to start wrapping our minds around what that's going to look like, not only for the capital, but also for the ongoing operation and maintenance.
So how much of this project is funded? Like what percentage?
For the deck, as of yet, the only thing that's funded is the study to assess the feasibility.
Okay, I'll follow up with Ms. Yellen later. Thank you.
Another thing that we want to talk about when we talk about programming is the safety of the deck itself. And I think one of the things that's really important to talk about here is that, you know, planning for safety, I think, happens at this level of planning. Because there are ways to do that around natural surveillance, natural access control to the deck, and different ways to kind of manage and maintain that. So we know that the activity is important. We want to make sure people are safe when they're activating the deck, but also understanding that visibility into the spaces. We want to balance that here, right? We want really good visibility into it, but we also want to control climate with shade. And so just thinking about how all those interplay and interrelate. And then we've started to look at these kind of program diagrams. We've done 3 of them. This will be hard for you to read. I apologize for that because there's a lot of information on here, but I'll try to give you the general gist. and we'll certainly share this with you all. But what this is doing is it's starting to take some of those program elements and aggregate them and think about where they could live on this, as you said, 6-block stretch, 7-block stretch. This is one that, for those of you that attended the last meeting, it'll be familiar. This is that diagram that we started to talk about with this idea of sunset gardens and art gardens sort of flanking the two ends. And this is to not only sort of create those good pedestrian connections north and south at those ends, but that's also thinking about what that would look like if you are coming in via I-10 to also have that kind of facade at each end of the tunnel, which was something that we heard in the last meeting as a good piece of feedback. You'll see on all these diagrams, there'll be these little kind of star-shaped icons. We're talking about some kind of iconographic structure that could really, sort of symbolize El Paso. It could involve public art. It can include light. We have some examples at the end, but these would sort of signify your entry to this point. In this plan, we looked at maybe a larger kind of entertainment and celebration space here, which would be like concerts and dining culture. We looked at what we're calling downtown living and the idea that that could invite kind of almost like backyard play spaces where you could have sort of giant games that adults and kids could engage in. This could really kind of cater to people that are living around the deck, but also to kind of the 9 to 5 crew downtown. We also have a space that we really could sort of imagine office workers coming for lunch and maybe even an adult beverage after work. And then, we included places for, it's called downtown living, where you could have curated event spaces that people could have functions at, and so on and so forth. And then we started to look at some different alternatives of how to break this out. So that one was very kind of block by block. And we started to ask the question, does it make sense to have an alternative where we look at kind of linking these blocks together? So instead of thinking of them as separate urban rooms, is there a way to kind of link them as if you would come and spend the day and you'd have your whole itinerary through the deck? And so this one looks at like a downtown LA. This could tie into a proposed bike and pedestrian path running along Wyoming. This could include kiosks and marketplace structures to line that south edge, which would help mitigate the backs of the buildings that currently face Wyoming. We think that could really activate and make that a nice edge. The idea of seeing the existing structures on the north side as a real opportunity to engage with the deck, to really see their kind of deck facing side as a kind of living gallery of opening up to the space and providing a good passageway there. And then this looks at the idea of a bandstand, the idea of a central plaza, a kind of civic room. This may be more formal kind of park space, sort of a counterpoint to San Jacinto. The idea of this is called the Discovery Zone, the idea of kind of a children's play space, especially where we're connecting to neighborhoods. That could be a good mix. And then the third option that we looked at looks at maybe moving that idea of a children's, sort of an interactive children's zone a little bit closer to the Children's Museum. This idea of bringing some active uses, we've talked about some of the kind of backyard play spaces, but this would be looking at some of this, maybe some sport things. We heard about people wanting to see, some kind of like futsal or other kinds of running track, some of those kinds of facilities. The idea is that we would design them in such a way that they were flexible so that this could also, that you could do event space, you could do the activities, and that it could kind of, your special events could be used in one way, and then in your daily and weekly it could be used in another way. We also talk about this idea in this one of this garden becomes almost more of that civic room tying to the town hall. And then this is that idea of a kind of El Paso Plaza, deck plaza identity, and just different examples from other cities around the states. And you can see here how they incorporate lighting, how they incorporate sort of large architectural features. And we just think that there's a really great opportunity to bring that into placemaking here. So that was a quick overview. We can get into it deeper, but some of the things that we want to hear from you all are, any of those program ideas starting to resonate? Any of them exciting? Do they begin to capture the spirit of El Paso? I'd be interested to hear from you about what uses feel appropriate for maybe like the core of the space versus the edges, or if there are specific zones that seem to resonate more for you than others. And then what are some things that we're missing?
When are you gonna talk about parking?
Oh, when our traffic engineer has a chance to look at it. Next time.
So I'm really excited about this. What you've presented is amazing, and it looks like you guys have put so much thought into this. And really, when I started looking at this and heard about the deck plaza from the beginning, I was really excited about the economic impact that it would have on the city. Coming from the events realm, I'm so glad you guys brought up the health stuff. I think that's really important. And what it also got me thinking about was kind of my first career. I'm on career 3.0. I was a teacher for a really long time. And one of those things that we continuously saw in classrooms was the lack of green space. And so this brings up like a perfect opportunity to talk about the mental health benefit that it has for students, as well as, being and my husband was a park ranger, and there's tons of study about nature, God, what is the word? It's a nature deficit disorder, which is an actual thing. I encourage people to read about it if you haven't heard about it. I also, tout myself as an amateur horticulturalist and how trees and plants can actually help improve the air quality. I think that's a really important thing to look at as well. And then the next thing is, being a parent and also having aging parents who are now retired, and what mental health benefits we have from creating community and really connecting different parts of the community together. I think that's a really important part to look at as far as the health benefits that this could help. And just for all of us, really, how events, going back to my events background, how events and community really do improve people's overall quality of life. I think those are really important things to consider when we are talking about this in a really holistic way.
I think it's a really cool project. I think we deserve good things. The question I have is this is not the geographic center of El Paso. So it's not easily accessible to all parts of El Paso, right? So part of the long-term vision, is there a plan to provide parks like this across the city so everybody has this as a walkable destination in their neighborhood?
I'll answer that.
Yeah. Oh, I have some feedback on this one.
I think I've been thinking a lot about that and looking at other cities where they've created more than one of these. Dallas is on expanding their first and building their second. Atlanta has built 4 of them. Houston has 4 of them slated.
For what, tech parks?
So different parts of their geography. So I've been thinking about where else would they, fit. You need the retaining walls to hold the weight of them.
Well, it sounds cheaper to put just neighborhood parks.
Oh, neighborhood parks. Yeah, no,
that's
I
not
thought you were
cheap. That's
talking about,
spread it
talking
everywhere.
about deck
No,
parks.
the model.
Oh,
Deck
okay.
parks are expensive and
Got
kind of a waste of money in terms of.
Anyway, I think the area around Texas Tech could be a really cool place to connect those neighborhoods that have been separated by I-10. So I think there are other places where it can make sense down the line.
As far as data-driven decisions, what areas have the worst heat urban effect in El Paso?
Yeah, someone has started looking at those heat. Actually, Mend Collaborative showed us what this does with the reduction of a heat map. So we can ask if they could bring those back. But
Yeah, the worst area is actually Angel's Triangle in the Northeast. That'd be a great spot for a park like this. Good vision.
I was just going to add to what Tracy was saying, in that your question is pretty broad in scope, and it's actually something that cities typically look at when they do park master plan. And the city is actually poised right now to begin such a process pretty soon, and the types of issues you're talking about will be pretty front and center there, because it's all about looking ahead for open space needs at different scales to serve different types of needs in different locations. Right, and it usually looks 30, 40 years ahead.
It's very inspiring to see a plan. This is a once in a generation opportunity to improve our air quality by having a very credible organization fight for our air quality. So that's a missed opportunity.
So you all have mentioned several times that part of what this is about, or you've listened to concerns about preventing displacement. And so I'm kind of curious about what specifically you all are looking into. For example, Rio Grande neighborhood, the median income is $20,000 or $20,000 a year. People living below the poverty line is 36%. That's a lot higher than that's double the rest of El Paso. Number of renters in our neighborhood is 72. You all mentioned about 90% in the study area. And seniors living below the poverty line is 40%. That's double the rest of the city in our area. So this is a really nice amenity. Amenities increase property values. It's passed on to the homeowners and also to renters. So what kind of mechanisms or interventions are going to be implemented or recommended?
Why don't you go ahead and
Yeah,
add
this,
something to that?
okay, great, thanks. So a lot of this grows out of the uptown plan, partly in anticipation, not just of this, but of the fact that, as you probably all know, there's sort of because of our changing demographics, a national move in. There are more and more households without kids that want to live in close-in neighborhoods, et cetera. So in the downtown plan, we adopted a 33% goal for, or 30%, roughly a third goal for affordable housing as a share of all net new housing.
Subsidized housing?
Subsidized, yeah, genuine affordable across the full spectrum from the equivalent of public housing to up to 80% of, from up to 80% of area median, but the full spectrum of what's considered affordable, which would probably be if not the highest, one of the highest goals or requirements. I'm not quite sure how it'll land in between in Texas right now. And many cities are currently aiming for 15%. So it was very much in recognition of two things. In part, when you get close in, this will be an amenity that will attract more folks. So we need to expand the supply of affordable housing, not just maintain what is here and in the surrounding neighborhoods, but also recognition that even if this weren't happening, there is a move in that we need to protect people from. Well, protect people. We need to protect economic diversity in close-in neighborhoods.
So what about people who are already here, like me, for example?
Who are what? Sorry?
Who already live in the neighborhood?
Yes.
Whose property values increase or their property tax increases. Is there a way to freeze property increase values?
Okay, you're really going beyond our immediate scope, and I could tell you what other cities do, which is there are a range of techniques, which is to link, but I cannot commit
But are you all
also
looking
to
at
this.
it? Because that would be part of preventing displacement.
Well, let me just tell you the suite of things available, because you're introducing new territory here. There are lots of tools that freeze real estate taxes related to income, age and income. Clearly, maintaining the stock of affordable housing is the priority above creating new affordable housing. One of the things we talked about in the uptown downtown plan is reinvesting in existing affordable housing. I don't know how this would apply in your case, but to make sure that in terms of its quality and livability, it is keeping up with what standards should be. And Joaquin,
I think we have some questions on that. I just want to shift the focus back to deck stuff. If you all want to have a separate conversation specifically on downtown, uptown plan type policies and strategies, we can definitely do that.
So I believe there are a few folks online who have their hands raised. Mind calling on them?
Hello?
Ask your question.
Hi, can y'all hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, first of all, in terms of some of the programming, I love the idea of doggy happy hours, AKA yappy hours. It's a thing, look it up. Also want to say too that I think it's also important in the context of the north-south connections, especially for neighborhoods like Rio Grande, Central, Sunset Heights, as well as a sort of central business district of downtown. I think maintaining those north-south connections, I think, are extremely important in terms of providing access to the deck park, but overall connectivity, a lot of it which was severed by I-10 coming into this area in the late 1960s as well. getting back to the conversation about the actual sort of deck park and different sort of ideas, I think one of the things that really probably can't be stressed enough is the focus on shade and really on green, both in terms of vegetation, but in terms of ways to create a space that is shaded during the day, or at least as much as possible. I really like the idea of looking at having trees planted in the streets surrounding it, leading to that area. There's a couple of different initiatives by Eco El Paso and others that are, planting. I think it's a million tree initiative to plant trees throughout the city of El Paso. Certainly this area would make a lot of sense in terms of that. The one idea that I thought was interesting in terms of the design was the sort of, I forgot what y'all called it, the Parkside Gallery, the sort of public-private mix. I mean, I think about, in terms of how that could help with whatever costs might be associated with maintenance, if there was an ability for some of those businesses or public-private to be able to sort of fund the continuity of the maintenance of it. And then another idea that I had, I like the idea of how I think in almost all of the designs you have the sort of sunset vista or the community terrace, like a very green, or it seems a very vegetated sort of oriented sort of space there. I think that's like a really great bookends to this. I also think too, in terms of this space as it relates towards I-10 and the fact that you have tens of thousands of people that cross every single day through I-10. Oftentimes they're traveling through El Paso, and mostly what they see is sort of a whole lot of, frontage roads and everything surrounding with that. This provides another opportunity and another perspective to get people off of I-10 and to explore the beautiful city that we have. I would say, and this is just sort of thinking there outside the box, I have no idea the practicality of this, is what does the visibility of the deck look like underneath it? What does it look like when people are driving underneath it on I-10? Is there a lighting component? Is there a vegetation component? Is there skylights that come into I-10, something that would get a 10-year-old or an 8-year-old to beg their parents to get off the street and to turn around? I just sort of think that this is also an opportunity as well to look at visibility of our city from a larger scale and think about this project as really an exclamation point, as an invitation for people to come in to get off the highway and to sort of see this desert oasis that we know as El Paso del Norte. So that was just another sort of thought I had. I also think too, in terms of sustainability and resilience and the use of solar, both as an opportunity for infrastructure, shade infrastructure, but also as an opportunity to sort of power, what is on this deck is also a really great idea to consider as well, and presents a forward-facing community too. So I hope that was productive in terms of some of my comments.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Stephanie online. Stephanie?
Hi, I was just hoping you could elaborate on how tours would work from the earlier part of the presentation.
That would be Mara, are you still on?
Can you
I
hear?
am still here, but can you repeat the question for me?
The question was, could you briefly explain what a TERS is?
And how the tours would work?
How does it work?
Yeah, specifically how you're envisioning it would work in this neighborhood.
Yeah, and I think two big asterisks on that is that we still need to research it, and that we will be looking at other sources as well for funding and financing. That's not kind of our. But how we're thinking about tax increment financing is either through an existing TERS, which we know there's the downtown TERS, or we can define a different geography, and it can be non-contiguous. So especially when we're thinking about the neighborhoods and how they're going to see the benefits from an investment like this, I think there's a lot of flexibility that we can do within tax increment financing. And the really central principle of it is that major investments in public amenities create value. And there's different ways to capture that value. There's different ways that we can kind of bring that back and put money into the value itself, into the investment, but also into other kind of adjacent programmatic or amenities or just homeowners themselves and being able to kind of see that upkeep. So I think how we're thinking of it is definitely a lot more conversations and a lot more research about how people are envisioning this deck plaza as part of kind of a bigger story about investment in downtown El Paso and how to maybe tie some of those together and use tax increment financing to use those developments and put some of the funding back into those programs. Does that help, or do you want a little bit more of the technical financial side as well?
Yeah, and would this typically be just in areas that are being redeveloped, or how would it, apply to the general neighborhood where the TERS is implemented?
Yeah, so it is just for redevelopments, and that's because the value creation is kind of based on that new investment. And then what you'll see is that it's usually funded for capital, and there's different states have different requirements on how it can or can't be used for operations. I think that's a really other key consideration. So I think what we're saying for residents is the impacts vary. We can do kind of sliding scale taxes. We can tax just businesses and not residents. We can do different things there that will kind of change how it feels to the neighborhood. Whether it even touches the neighborhood, I think, is also a really big question. A lot of tax increment financing is kind of just in a business district. And so we'll see it kind of on the corporate scale and less on the residential, but it can be used in different ways. And so I think what residents would primarily see is how that money would go back into their neighborhood. And like we're saying, the connections between the north and the south ends of downtown, kind of going across the deck plaza in addition to the plaza itself.
There are other.
Is there another online?
We have two more people online. Next, we have Suzanne Dipp.
Sure, thank you. Well, I've mentioned in the past, I am big on tourism and inviting people in. I see, you guys are consistently sticking with that deck idea where it's 5 or 6 blocks in a tunnel for those people underneath. And I guess further touching on what Peter has mentioned is my concern as well. I think we can, I was kind of hoping that it would visually be stunning for drivers to see, a Ponte Vecchio idea or trails, lit trails, or dynamic activity from the road. So it's not a tunnel, it would be something else. And I'm hoping maybe we can open it up a little bit so it's not this very long tunnel when you hit the core of the Sun City, because that's not what we're about. It's the most interesting part of our city from I-10, and we'll be in darkness. So again, I'm going to stick to that point. I would hope you guys have some great suggestions. We have the oldest continuous history in the entire United States. I know you probably haven't delved into over 400 years of it, but it is rich. And not only that, completely dynamic, that we're right next to the border, and we have just an interweaving with the culture of Mexico. I don't think we're going to communicate that by this tunnel. And my hope is that we come up with, at the next meeting, some dynamic ideas that not only are lit naturally, but also provide visual intrigue. Again, it would be our best billboard. We need to attract money into the city and not just keep working on the people within the city. So anyway, I think that would be a lost opportunity. We're asking you guys to do that. And I would love for our next meeting for you guys to come up with some dynamic ideas in that regard. Would really appreciate that. And thank you for all the work you've done to this point.
Suzanne, you'll be happy to know that we did talk to the engineers about about skylighting and the implications, so we can maybe have a little deeper conversation about it next time.
Great, great. It would be really dynamic if we could really think about doing something that hasn't been done in other cities underneath there as well, if we're going to stick to a tunnel. So I'd love to, we can brainstorm ideas on that as well. But I think this is it's not just about, so many people have done this thing. So it's not so far of a reach. I know you all have been through this process many times. We're asking you for something special. We're really begging you, actually, because we need to get the income of the city up, and we need to help all of the businesses. So that would be a huge boon for us, especially if we're going to cover the core of our city, the most important moment as they drive through it. Thank you, Maggie and David and Pierce.
Thank you.
We have the last person, Rich and Vanessa.
Thanks.
Yes, thank you. My brand neighborhood area, and I'm a private citizen, so a lot of these meetings. And just curious because the maps that I'm looking at don't seem to, that you guys are showing tonight's presentation, maps that TxDOT is showing. And I was just curious if you guys could clarify. So if this are the 5.2 acres that you guys are identifying as underused, are those then not front TxDOT has been showing, or I mean, is it with the freeway? I guess I'm just about the collaborative, the political process of does one thing have to be approved prior to the other? What we've seen in terms of the TxDOT acreage and the properties that are going to be used or some kind of eminent domain. So thank you.
So I'm not sure we caught your entire question because you broke off a few times, but I think I got the gist of it. So I'm going to repeat the question. And if you could make sure that you got it right. You were noting that the diagrams that we've made representing the deck don't seem to correspond exactly with some of the diagrams of the TxDOT alternatives. Was that the basic question? And you wanted to know whether, to confirm whether that is in fact the case. Did you hear me?
Okay, the maps that you guys are showing are different from the maps that TxDOT is showing. And I'll go ahead and put my question and make it that way. Thank you.
All right, well, let me try to begin addressing that, and then maybe in your chat you can clarify. But it is a fact that TxDOT currently has several alternatives that are still under consideration, and they differ from each other significantly. But at the risk of a little oversimplification, there are broadly sort of two families of alternatives. One that involves expanding the footprint of I-10 to effectively take the property on the northern side of I-10. But there is, I believe, a couple of versions of the alternatives that do not do that, where it stays roughly within its existing footprint and preserves the properties on the northern side. So what we've been doing is looking at our alternatives in the context of both families of TxDOT alternatives, because the decision on which option will go forward is ultimately a TxDOT decision, not a city decision. And so as we're working with the city to explore taking alternatives, we need to look at both possibilities. And so that's what we've been doing. But as you can see from the evaluation that we did, the preliminary evaluation that David touched on, you will see that based on the criteria for evaluation that we've been hearing from you, the alternatives that preserve the properties on the northern side of the deck really appear to perform a lot better from the standpoint of just creating a successful deck space. So that's kind of where we are right now with the process. But I just want to acknowledge that we are doing this exercise of evaluating and coming up with deck concepts in the context of there being multiple alternatives for the I-10 reconstruction that TechStart is still considering.
Very quick postscript. For example, Pierre pointed out that in one of TxDOT's alternatives, basically the sites are preserved that are existing buildings that we could redevelop. That's referred to as terra firma or firm ground. What we are saying is if they ultimately pick a different alternative, then we need the structural capability to create buildings on the deck in place of what those buildings that would have been on firm ground, because we have come to realize, and listening to all of you and understanding how to make this deck a really great place, that we need buildings that open directly onto the deck. So we're sort of reversing the process a little bit by now giving TxDOT back the information that we need to give them that says, what do we need from their configurations to create, or their ultimate preferred configuration, preferred option to create the deck we need. The most vigorous conversations, and they've been, I think, relatively successful so far, are be that we can't have little mini freeways on each side of the deck. We need streets that are crossable, that invite pedestrians. And I think that's been a successful conversation so far. But I think this is still a dynamic process, and we are now introducing into it how the deck itself should influence this conversation. That makes sense to everyone. I hope that helps.
Did we answer your question?
The answer is stay engaged.
All right, we do have a couple of questions in the room, so I think start with you and then.
A quick question on the concept of connectivity and accessibility. Has the feasibility of trolley car connection been considered at all? Trolley car, it'd be nice if I could park somewhere down over here and take the trolley and end up at the park. It's just, has it been considered? If it's not, it might be something to look at.
Well, our transportation expert is not here right now, but we can attempt to try to channel it.
It might increase the amount of activity on the streetcars.
The existing streetcars, and I actually just heard today from Joaquin, who may want to jump in, that the operation of the streetcar system is an expensive proposition. And they don't seem to be having a lot of ridership. So just given that context, because of the location of the deck, there's the potential that this deck could give a real boost to the streetcar system, because it's connecting people from both sides to the deck. And the way transit works, it's almost ideally suited to enable people who want to go to the deck park and just hang out without necessarily having to figure out where to park. Or if you want to have a drink and you don't have to worry about drinking and driving and stuff like that. All those sorts of benefits accrue. And so, while we haven't studied the feasibility of expanding as part of the scope of this project, it's important to note that this deck can actually do a lot for making transit and circulator systems much more viable.
That was the idea of that mobility hub along Oregon, that you could tie bus and streetcar together in a way that could also be kind of a dynamic spot that could have shade structures associated with it, that could have a small cafe associated with it, that could have micro-mobility, so scooters, e-bikes, things like that could help people get around. So, and like I said, we have to talk about parking still, and our engineers looking at it, but the idea of seeing all of the parking assets as a way to connect versus having to do like just blocks of straight surface lots, or something that's going to take up a lot of space and add to the heat island effect. So I think it can be really dynamic.
It can also help with events in particular, as you well know.
The idea that got me the most excited was you all mentioned people, living and businesses operating right on the deck park frontage. And the reason for that is I think it would help with one of the biggest problems El Paso's had in the last 2 decades or so, which is getting the talent that grows up here to come back to El Paso. I remember when I first moved back to town, downtown wasn't really an area you thought of living in. And I think an area like that would be very attractive to people after finishing their college degree, graduate degree, professional degree, and things like that, to live in downtown and provide the energy that our downtown needs in order to thrive. And also in that, it would hopefully promote, more people living downtown and reducing our sprawl, which has been incredible over the last 20 years. I remember, growing up in the high schools that were here, and I moved back and somebody told me what Pebble Hills was, and I thought, what is Pebble Hills and where is this? Because it was not a thing when I grew up. And so it would help with that in terms of building more vertical development downtown.
I think you're exactly right on. One of the things that we discovered in the Uptown Downtown Plan was what a large percentage of the folks who go to UTEP or community college here then do leave El Paso for the very reason that you suggested. And it's not just, it becomes circular. They leave in part because they want the quality of life. And again, mixed use walkable are central to what these folks are looking for. But there are also places that have more of that environment, have more of the jobs they're looking for, because jobs go where those folks want to go. So if we can create the kind of downtown, and this will play a very important role in this, that really is a walkable, fun, livable, a highly interactive kind of place that will attract, forget folks moving to El Paso, that would be great too, but many of the folks to allow you to grow much more of your own talent, so to speak, because there are a lot of folks that you are losing who I think would probably love to stay here. That in turn will help expand the job choices that they have, because those companies will come here because those folks are staying here. And one thing I want to note, just to add, because this is, past have been suspicious about this. One reason that so much of the large majority of net new housing has gone out of the periphery of El Paso and into your suburbs up until very recently. But your demographics, along with the rest of this country's demographics, are dramatically changing so that there is a huge unmet demand for multifamily housing here already, particularly in walkable places that are mixed use. And that's why the real estate consultants who advised us in the Uptown Downtown Plan did two sets of projections. One, they said, based on housing demand to, over the last 20 years or 30 years, how much might go downtown? Not much. Based on changing demographics and where's the unmet demand, how much could come down here? And there was a lot of it, and a lot of it is from the very folks that you're describing.
So I don't know when this is the time to bring this up, but as I saw like the major art infrastructures that you guys are talking about, I want to make sure that those are reflective of El Paso and designed by El Pasoans. I don't know if fabrication will happen here or what that looks like, but there's just so much untapped talent here. And that's such an amazing way to make a mark on their city, and hopefully that is already in consideration.
We would strongly encourage the public art to be a full sort of public art program here.
Absolutely.
On the deck, and specifically related to local artists.
And they talked a lot about the tunnel, like that's also an opportunity. There's so many cool things that have happened. I was reading about like a highway in, I think, Switzerland or Germany that made a tune out of driving through a tunnel like that. And I'm just like, there's so many cool things. And if we open up these opportunities to our community, I think that the creativity will flow.
You'll notice us grow a little quiet whenever anybody talks about what are we going to do in the tunnel. And that is because there's a whole different factor there. People aren't walking through it, they're driving through it.
Yeah.
So we are very determined to bring something really creative, inventive, and innovative. But we have to do that in partnership with the people who care about the drivers primarily, if you see what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Or this is going to be a collective creative enterprise. The other thing I want to just quickly note that we have to keep thinking of change over time. This could be a great place for the living culture of El Paso today, but that's only good if it's a great place for the living culture of El Paso 20 years from now. One of the great sort of changes in public art that's going on right now is, instead of permanent installations, the idea of digital public art that can be reprogrammed by artists every week, every month, every year, and the artists of El Paso, so that this can be just as new in 2040 as it is in 2030. Is that making sense?
Yeah, absolutely. For sure.
we have any more questions online?
It doesn't look like we do.
Wanna go-
I don't know if Peter put his hand down and put it up again or just never put it down.
He put some stuff in. I thought I saw somebody put some things
I,
in.
this is Suzanne. I just want to say one more thing. I know I've mentioned it before, but don't want you all to forget it. I know you're looking at pathways and movement. Again, Yandell, some of these other streets, so many of them are one way in downtown. And I know I worked with David on the uptown, downtown. And if we can get these streets to go two-way, that's going to do so much as far as revitalizing the city, just creating vibrancy and success for businesses. Those two-way streets rather than one way that act kind of as little mini highways.
I live on Yandell and I am not okay with that. Just as an added like perspective, I do not want two-way down Yandell as a resident on Yandell. And my workplace is on Yandell. And traffic horrendous.
Can you explain why?
I think just the space and the traffic that's already present going one way, like I just don't think it's a good idea.
So an urban design principle is actually to not have all those one ways. And the way Yandell is before the freeway, it goes from the exit of the freeway at Campbell to over to El Paso Street. It's 4 lanes of very fast moving cars. No opportunity for businesses to attract anyone because you can't even park there. They don't allow meters. So that fast moving traffic is not conducive to pedestrians or bikes. They've essentially, the streets essentially turned that street into a freeway many years ago.
Understood. We don't expect everybody to agree on all things either. So
Yeah, that's fine what she thinks. Like, I'm just giving my perspective as a person that actually lives and works on Yandell. Especially considering the traffic around specifically the St. Clements, it's a nightmare, the school.
I mean, I think at the end of the day, what we do know is that it has to work for people getting around. Again, this kind of theme of having to work for your everyday, having to work for events, having to work, it's gonna have to satisfy the highways on and off requirements. You know, so there are a lot of factors in here, but I think I appreciate Suzanne's point about the vibrancy of businesses. We want to be sure that the sidewalk in that kind of realm is designed to be, you know, to encourage good walkability and the success of those businesses. And I think that's where the design of the intersections is also really important. So we'll put it all into the mix.
We want cars the minute they come up to the surface, not to feel like they're on an off-ramp, but to feel they're on a walkable urban street.
Yep.
And I'll just add, I think Suzanne, you made some good points. But the network of downtown streets includes several one-way streets. And converting all of them to two-way can be pretty challenging, and it could be something that proves to be difficult to accomplish. And so that said, the alternative is to take the approach of, even if they are one-way, to find a way to name them so that they can actually operate as pedestrian-friendly streets.
What do we say, we agree on the goals and we don't necessarily have the means, right? So
Just to that, this is my only thing is, I think this plan is very thoughtful. I love the environmental elements of it. I think the desire to have mixed income housing is important. As a person who I don't want it to be at the cost of my health. I hate that it's tied, like you say, this is a whole different issue, but it is tied. It is tied to this expansion. And it's at the health of the neighbors that I live and serve and work with, if it's expanded in our area. And also literally because of what those different options are, it's at the expense of our organization, Ciudad Nueva. And so I don't know, we really are at the mercy of TxDOT, but I think you guys have a dialogue with them that I don't have. And so that's there are ways for our communities to get through this. And I really look forward to hearing parking and flow, but I just don't want it to be at the expense of my health and my neighbor's health. And also I don't know where we're gonna go if
I know that one of the plans, because I talked with St. Clemens, is like tearing down some of their buildings and then they would tear down our building and then I don't know where we would be. So I know we're just one little person, one little group, and we're one little neighborhood, but like we matter.
I'll just make one comment because I think everyone's been hopefully sending in comments to TxDOT. The I-10, this project, could be done without I-10 if we could figure out how to pay for it, right? So that's one, the affordability, the structures underneath. It could also be done if TxDOT picks an alternative that does significant work on I-10, but it doesn't have to expand lanes. So as long as the work is significant enough, more than a repaving, then they have to rebuild the bridges over top. And when they rebuild those bridges over top, because they have to create a different height of the bridges by law, then we have the opportunity for them to do the retaining walls. So our comment that this is the opportunity isn't around it being wider or more lanes or less lanes. It's doing enough work on I-10 that would cause them to also invest in this on the retaining walls and the bridges over top. Because if they expand those bridges or any work that they do with those bridges, that's less concrete that we have to come up with to pay for to make the deck work. So it really, again, it could be they do nothing and then we decide as a community whether we would do that. They do not an expanded version, but enough work on it that could make it happen. Or they're doing an expanded version, which lots of people have already opposed. So, that's just to give you some what I think about how that decision of our community is when it comes to the deck.
The Plaza Foundation's official stance is don't expand, or are
We haven't taken a position. We have made comments to TxDOT that we would like this to be incorporated into their alternative, and that they choose an alternative that isn't adverse to the things that you've mentioned before. And we've submitted those comments online like everybody else has.
So you've mentioned personally that the more lanes we add to the freeway, the cleaner our quality will get.
That's right.
You've mentioned that if we expand the freeway, that will result in less air pollution.
Well, that's the data that the engineers from the TxDOT studies are doing, that they say. Yeah, I'll try to find that. I don't know where that is, but it has to do with cars. The less they sit, the less air pollution.
So if we add 15 lanes, that's less pollution than 10 lanes.
No,
That's
if the cars go smoother, there's less pollution.
So the more lanes we add, the less air pollution we'll get.
So it'll be like Katy, Texas, where they have lanes. So where does it
That's
stop?
hilarious.
But it's not quite as simplistic as you put it, but I think that's the basic logic.
CDC, the EPA, the US DOT also say that's wrong, California DOT. We have data too. We'd love to share, because if you're correct, I support 20%.
I just want to jump in. I think that really the takeaway from us here as city staff, as a consulting team, there are a lot of decisions that are going to be beyond our control that TxDOT is going to make. We should see this project as an opportunity and as a response to whatever TxDOT decides to do. I encourage everyone, the city has provided comments to TxDOT, asking for them to think about things like connectivity, think about things like the deck park, pedestrian safety and walkability in their preferred alternative. And I would encourage everybody to do the same. But ultimately, those decisions are not going to be decisions that are going to be decided upon by our feasibility study.
That's true, but as a community and health foundation that can fight for a healthy decision for our community, I'd expect that's your role instead. You're
Well, the mission of Paso Norte Health Foundation literally says that the Health Foundation leads, leverages, and invests in initiatives, programs, policies that promote health and prevent disease in the Paso Norte region. So we're talking about an expansion of the freeway that would increase traffic pollution, which has already been shown to be linked to diseases which are concentrated in this area. So as a health foundation, we would expect y'all to tell them not to increase lanes.
Let me jump in on that. This is not a discussion about the TxDOT project necessarily. I mean, we can argue about the benefits of we do that. As an MPO, we do all the air quality analysis that is linked to congestion, right? So yes, I mean, you're absolutely right. The more you idle, the higher your emission levels, right? So if we don't take care of congestion, our emission levels are going to be higher and therefore air quality is going to be worse.
What we're pushing for the
So
solution.
we are, so, you know,
Colorado.
we can argue about the benefits of, you know, of certain freeway projects. Not every freeway project is the same. This is not the Katy Freeway in Houston, come on, right? So this is, the TxDOT project here in downtown is fixing a bottleneck. Today, we have 4 lanes to the west of downtown, and we have 5 lanes to the east, and 3 lanes going to the chute. To me, it doesn't make any sense just to rebuild it. If we're gonna rebuild it, because we have to rebuild it, the pavement is falling apart, and if you're gonna do the major investment of rebuilding, well, might as well fix that bottleneck. So this is not necessarily the same case that you hear about other freeway projects, about induced demand and all that. I mean, those are concepts that are real, that are true, but when you look at the bigger picture, which I completely agree, the problem that we're having here in El Paso as an urbanized area is the sprawl. The truth is, we're not growing population-wise of the rest of the metropolitan areas. We're not growing. We saw the latest census numbers that the growth between 2021 and 2022 was, I think we grew 600 people. That's nothing, right? And yet, we see the sprawl. That's a totally different story, right? And that's something that as an MPO, when we look at the regional perspective, we need to fix it and we need to lead that. But it's not just a transportation problem. It's a land use problem. It's a market-driven problem with developers building out there because they can, right? So how do we bring them, in general terms, to bring, come back to the downtown areas, increase density instead of building only single-family units, in the outskirts, and just generate more sprawl? Yeah.
We're not arguing, we're for density. For carefully thought out density projects. The thing is that we're building more road and we're putting more and encouraging people to drive more, but we need cars to get off the road, so we need public transit.
I don't disagree, but
would encourage?
I don't disagree with that, but today we're looking at this project, the Downtown 10 project for TxDOT, and how it's connected to the deck. Because, today they are separate projects, right? But obviously, at some point, they have to be linked, right? And, but we need to be more realistic in terms of what this project, the Downtown 10 project through downtown, is doing, right? The other projects that TxDOT is part of their concept, their long-range plan about doing the same footprint, east of downtown, that's a different story. That's a totally different story.
And I appreciate what you said about, focusing on this, but everything's intersected. So what things look like if people who were developing past the loop thought about transportation, thought about all these things that they thought about individually, but they thought about it as intersecting issues.
And I appreciate your data-driven conversation. And I'm just asking for the same support and data from the health foundation.
And we've
So
been
if you
talking
did
about
mention
that.
that does increase air pollution.
So
Can you share
this-
this data with health foundation, please?
What we're showing, and we can show all the analysis that we did, is that by eliminating or reducing congestion, air quality gets better. Right? That's the bottom line.
For how long?
That's
It
what we
does
have in
induce
common.
demand.
Sorry?
For how long? Because it induces demand for more traffic and more sprawl.
Well, I don't want to get into that argument.
To get
now,
into
but
that
it's,
state, it's not arguing.
yeah, but
If I may, John, here, I want to go back to what you were saying. I think the conversation that you're having is a fascinating one that I'm very interested in. But it's really something that in the scope of this project it can't be solved within the scope of this project. But you both mentioned something about density that I think is worth highlighting. Because I think inherent in this challenge, and I think you referred to it, is that when you talk about alternative modes of transportation, getting people out of their cars, you've got to create a viable alternative because otherwise people still will drive, right? And it's very challenging to wave a magic wand and change the environment in one flash. The best places to start are places like downtown, where you've already got the bones, you've got the ingredients for successful communities that can be less carbon. And it's just fortunate that this Tech Plaza project happens to be located in the heart of it and provides an opportunity to try to begin to change the direction of the trend.
Yeah, the data shows that a lot of people in downtown already don't own cars. It's the lowest rate of car ownership in this area. So I think there's an opportunity for greater vision where you create like neighborhood plazas, right, across the city where people are attracted to do things within their area, and that also builds community. It's good that people come downtown, but if you had localized areas for people to go to, then you have opportunities for people to run into each other and they actually live within a certain radius of each other, right? So I think there's maybe an opportunity to kind of rethink things overall regarding the direction that all this is
But
going.
it seems like the opportunity right now exists in this corridor. I totally agree with you about creating these different hubs, but the opportunity that's being discussed right now is the one right now. And I love the health aspect, and I think that the air quality is important, but if we're looking at a whole person, mental health is also in there. You know, physical abilities with having access to that, creating community, those are also really important aspects to consider when looking at an event, at a space like this.
Air pollution causes depression. We have the data.
For sure, as, you know, and then hopefully the green base helps improve that. And
I think to Pierre's point too, you know, I think this is why continued participation in comprehensive planning and park planning is important, because so often I think in projects like this, neighborhood parks get pitted against a regional park instead of thinking both and. You know, I mean, technically for a region like this, both are important. You should have regional park spaces and you should have neighborhood park spaces.
To build on, so there's comments here. One of the things that to me has been very intriguing, I have to say, the spirit of when we first started the uptown downtown plan and folks said, what's this deck? Is it just the bait and switch, take the deck, oh, then you have to take the I-10 with it. I thought, well, what's the point here? And have really gotten excited about what the point can be, what the opportunity can be, what the potential could be. And one of the things that I hadn't thought about until listening to a couple of you tonight is this will be a downtown-wide park place to come together that will not be in competition with the kinds of things you're talking about, because we're talking about looking at ways to fund this as a deck that is independent from the parks that the city is providing across the city. This is something that is looked at as being funded by the value it creates, which is can only really happen downtown. But in turn, come back to sort of your mental health argument and add a slightly different dimension to it. One of the challenges I see in cities I work in is the increased fragmentation around race, income, age. People live near each other who are similar to them, spend time with people who are similar to them, and they're almost no matter how you cut it. And there's an increasing need for common ground that brings everybody together. Maybe it's once a month, not every day in terms of the way a neighborhood park would, but places that really attract the full spectrum of who El Paso is together, and then create ways and that really encourage interaction. Because that to me is one of the fundamental gaps in many of our cities, and to some extent in El Paso today. Is that fair?
Yeah, you're talking about sociospatial segregation.
Yes, and the increased fragmentation that we are experiencing, even though we don't want it to, and how rare the opportunities are to do something that really counteracts it.
Real quick, are you all looking at scholarship around sociospatial?
What, I'm sorry?
Scholarship, like academic papers to see what academics even found has well.
I had a comment to add.
So just
Second, Peter, I'm asking a question.
there's a question in person, and then we can go ahead and then after we get this one comment online, then we'll go ahead and wrap up.
Just
We
be
are
a
over
quick
time.
yes or no, I'm just curious.
I'd say quick answer is yes. We're looking at a lot of not only precedent examples, but also the research that has gone into them.
Are those sources?
So with that, Peter, do you have a question or comment? Rather? Question or comment online?
Yeah, this is Peter Schwartzman again. I just wanted to comment that, you know, the need to look at being responsible in terms of how we're developing. You know, the city had, since its 2011 plan, if not before, it really encouraging smart growth and encouraging this exact concept of having these sort of neighborhood oriented sort of mixed use spaces. Montecillo is probably the most successful example of that. It's very hard to do that in other areas. Metro 31, which is the metro transit station in the Northeast, it was also again meant to be mixed use. So I don't think that there's an issue of saying that the city or whatever is there, but there's a certain limit to what you can do to require a developer to do that. I don't think it's helpful for this project to what about it. This is a great opportunity to connect those neighborhoods, especially when we know that passionate young urbanists are living in these neighborhoods. They're living in Sunset Heights. Folks are living in Rio Grande and Central. And, you know, this is an opportunity to engage a multitude of different communities, a multitude of different neighborhoods as well. I just think, again, the important part is the access to this in terms of both north-south, but also the sensitivity to the frontage roads, and really not calling them frontage roads, but really sort of downtown streetscapes. And that's something that the city has asked TxDOT to look into. And I think is something that's very relevant towards additional comments for this project, are what do those streets look like, Wyoming and Yandell, in terms of how they interface with the deck park and the surrounding streets around it.
To give Joaquin some credit here, the first thing he ever said to us when we started the uptown downtown plan about the deck, because we're wondering how we should be investing in this, he said, no, there'll be a separate process, but what we care about is having good urban streets either side of the deck.
And we're going to have to let that be the last word. I promised I would come back with a bit of a plug for our upcoming public meetings. So I would come back to the plug for the upcoming community meetings. Tuesday, 4:30 to 6:30 each day. Tuesday, we will be at Mission Valley Regional Command. That's tomorrow from 4:30 to 6:30. Wednesday, we'll be at the Northgate Transfer Center, 9348 Dyer from 4:30 to 6:30. And then on Thursday, April 20th, we'll be back here in this building on the 17th floor from 4:30 to 6:30 here in 304 Texas. Thanks to everybody for joining us, for having such a productive, robust conversation this evening. Thanks to everybody joining us in person and online as well.
Thank you. Thank you. We
Thank you
really
all.
appreciate the robust conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.